Psalm 78.
Listen to the words of
My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things from of old.
things our ancestors have told us.
We have heard, and
we will not hide them.
things our ancestors have told us.
We will not hide them
From their descendants,
the praiseworthy deeds.
we will tell the next generation
His power and the wonders.
the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord,
He decreed statutes.
His power and the wonders He has
and
done.
established a law in Israel,
He decreed statutes for Jacob
which He commanded our ancestors,
and established a law in Israel,
so the next generation
which He
would
commanded
know
our
that
ancestors
even
to
the
teach their
children yet to
children.
be born,
So the next
and they
generation
in
would
turn
know
would tell their
them,
children.
even the children yet to be born.
Then they will put their trust in God
And they in turn would tell
and
their
will not
children.
forget His deeds, but keep
Then
His
they will
commands.
put their trust in God
They will not be like
and will not forget His deeds.
a stubborn
but keep
and
His
rebellious
commands.
generation.
They will not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, whose hearts were not loyal to God,
The men of Ephraim
whose spirits were not faithful to Him.
go armed with bows.
The men of
Turn
Ephraim
back on the day of battle.
go armed with bows.
They did not keep God's covenant.
Turn back on the day of
Refused to
battle.
live by His law.
They did not keep
Forgot
God's
what He
covenant
had done.
and refused
The
to live by His
wonders
law.
He has shown them.
They forgot what He
did
had
miracles
done,
in the sight of their ancestors.
the wonders He has
in
shown
the land
them.
of Egypt, in the reign
He
of
did
Zion.
miracles in the sight of their ancestors.
In the land of Egypt, He divided
In the reign of
sea
Zion,
and led them through. He made the waters stand up like
He
a wall.
divided the sea.
He guided
and
them
led
with
them
the
through.
cloud by day.
He made the
And
waters
with
stand
light
up like a
from the
wall.
fire.
He guided them with the cloud by day, and with
He
light
split the rocks
from the
in the
fire
wilderness.
all
And gave
night.
the water as abundant as the sea.
He split the rocks in
He
the
brought
wilderness
streams out of a
and
rocky
gave the
crag.
water as
And
abundant
that
as the
water
sea.
flowed down like rivers.
He brought streams out of a rocky crag
But they continued to
and
sin
made
against
water
Him,
flow down like rivers.
rebelling in the wilderness against the
But
Most
they
High.
continued to sin against Him,
They willfully put God
rebelling
to the test.
in the wilderness against
By
the Most
demanding
High.
the food they craved.
They willfully put
They
God
spoke
to the
against
test.
God. They said,
By demanding
"Can
the
God
food
really
they
spread a
craved,
table in the wilderness?"
they spoke against God.
True.
They
He
said,
struck the rock.
can God really spread
And
a
water
table
gushed
in the
out.
wilderness?
Streams flow abundantly.
True. He
But
struck
can He
the rock
also give us bread.
and water gushed out.
Can He
Streams
supply
flow
meat for
abundantly.
His people?
But can He also give
When
us
the Lord
bread?
heard this, He was
Can He
furious.
supply meat for His
His
people?
fire broke out against Jacob,
When the Lord heard this,
and His rocks rose.
He was
against Israel.
furious.
When
His
they
fire
did not
broke out
believe in
against
God,
Jacob,
a
and His
trust in
rocks
deliverance.
rose against Israel.
Yet He gave
For
and
they did
commanded
not believe in
to the
God,
skies above,
or trust in His
and opened
deliverance.
the doors of the heavens.
Yet He gave a
rained down
command
manna
to the
for the
skies
people to
above
eat.
and
He
opened
gave
the doors
them
of the
rain of
heavens.
heaven.
He rained down manna
Human beings
for
ate
the people
bread
to
of
eat.
Angels.
He gave
He
them the
sent them
grain of
all
heaven.
the food they could eat.
Human beings ate the bread of
He let
angels.
loose the east wind.
He sent them
from the
all
heaven.
the food they could eat.
And by His power made the south wind
He
blow.
let loose the east wind
He
from the
rained
heavens.
meat down on them
And by
like
His
that.
power made the south wind blow.
Birds like sin on the seashore.
He rained meat down
He made
on
them
them
come
like
down
that.
inside their camp.
Birds like sin
All
on
around
the
their
seashore.
They
He
ate
made them
till
come
they
down
were full.
inside their camp.
He had given them what
All
they
around
craved.
their tents.
But
They
before
ate till they were
turned
gorged.
what they craved.
He had given them what
Even
they
while the
craved.
food was still in their
But
mouth,
before they turned
God's
from
anger rose
what they
against
craved,
them.
even
He
while
put
the
to
food
death
was still
the
in their
sturdiest
mouths,
among them.
God's anger
Cutting
rose
down the
against
young men
them.
of Israel.
He put to death
In
the
spite of all
sturdiest
this,
among them,
They kept on
cutting
sinning.
down the young men of
in spite
Israel.
of His wonders. They did
In
not
spite of
believe.
all this,
So
they
He
kept
ended
on
their
sinning.
days
In spite of His wonders, they did
and
not
their years
believe.
in terror.
So He ended their days
Whenever
in
God slew
futility
them, they
and
would
their
seek
years
Him.
in terror.
They eagerly turned to him again.
Whenever God slew them,
They remembered that God
they would
was the
seek
rock.
him. They eagerly turned to him again.
Most High
They remembered that God was their rock. That God, Most High,
would flatter him
was their
with their
Redeemer.
mouths, lying to him.
But they would flatter him
Their hearts
with
were
their
not
mouths,
loyal to him.
lying to
They were
him
not
with their
faithful to
tongue.
his covenant.
Their hearts
Yet
were not
he was
loyal to him. They were
He
not
forgave
faithful
their
to his
iniquity.
covenant.
It did not
Yet he
destroy
was
them.
merciful.
Time after time.
He forgave their
He
iniquities.
restrained his
It did not destroy them.
It did not
Time
stir
after
up his
time.
full wrath.
He restrained his
He
anger.
remembered that day.
It did not stir up
but
his
flesh.
full wrath.
A passing
He
breath
remembered that day
that does not return.
were but flesh.
How often
A passing
they rebelled
breeze
against him
that does
in the
not
wilderness
return.
and grieved him.
How
in the
often
wasteland.
they rebelled
Again and
against
again,
him in the
they
wilderness
put God to the test.
and grieved him
They vexed
in the
the Holy
wasteland.
One of Israel.
Again and again,
They
they put God to the
power.
test. They vexed the Holy One of Israel.
From the oppressor.
They did not remember his
The day
power.
he displayed
The days
his
he
signs in
redeemed
Egypt.
them from
His
the
wonders
oppressor.
in the region
The
of
day he displayed his signs in
turned
Egypt.
the river
His
into blood.
wonders in the
They
region
could not
of Zone.
drink from their streams.
He
He
turned
sent
the
swarms
river
of flies
into
that
blood.
devoured them.
They could not drink
And frogs
from their
that
streams.
devastated them.
He sent swarms
He
of
gave
flies
their
that
crops to the
devoured them.
grasshopper.
And frogs that
Produced
devastated
to the
them.
locusts.
He gave their
He
crops to
destroyed
the
their
grasshopper
vines with hell.
that produced to the locusts.
And their
He destroyed their vines with hell.
He gave over the cattle to
And
the
their
hell.
sycamore figs
The
with sleep.
livestock to bolts of lightning.
He gave over their cattle to the
He
hell.
unleashed against them his
The
hot
livestock to
anger,
bolts
his
of
wrath,
lightning.
indignation,
He unleashed
And hostility.
against them his hot anger,
a band of
his
destroying
wrath,
angels.
indignation, and hostility.
He prepared
A band of destroying
path
angels.
for his anger. He did
He
not
prepared
spare them from death,
a path for his
but gave
anger.
them over to the plague.
He did not spare them
He struck
from
down
death,
all the firstborn of
but gave them over to the plague.
the first fruits of manhood.
He struck down
in the
all
tents
the
of
firstborn of Egypt,
But he brought
the first
his
fruits
people
of
out
manhood
like a flock.
in the tents of Ham.
He led them like sheep through the
But he
wilderness.
brought his people
guided
out
them
like a
safely.
flock.
So they
He
were
led them like sheep
unafraid.
through the wilderness.
But the sea
He guided them safely,
engulfed their enemies.
so they were
And so he
unafraid.
brought them to the
But the
border
sea
of his holy land.
engulfed their enemies.
To the hill
And so he
country,
brought
his
them
right hand
to the
had taken.
border of his holy land.
He drove out nations before them.
To the hill country
And
his
allotted
right
the
hand
land
had taken.
to them as an inheritance.
He drove out nations
He
before
settled
them
the tribes of Israel
and allotted
in
their
their
lands to them as an
But
inheritance.
they put God to
He settled the tribes of
and
Israel
rebelled
in their
against the
homes.
Most High. They did
But
not
they
keep
put
his
God to
statutes.
the test and rebelled
Like
against
their
the Most High.
ancestors.
They
were
did not keep
disloyal
his
and
statutes.
faithless.
Like their
As
ancestors,
unreliable as
they
a
were
false
disloyal and faithless.
They anger him
As unreliable
with their
as a
high
faulty
places.
boat.
They aroused his jealousy.
They
with
anger
their
him
idols.
with their high places.
When God heard them,
They aroused his
furious.
jealousy with their idols.
he rejected Israel completely.
When God heard them, he was
abandoned the
furious.
tabernacle of Shalom.
He rejected Israel completely.
The tent.
He abandoned the
set up
tabernacle
among
of
humans.
Shalom.
He sent the
The
ark of
tent
his might
he had set up
into
among
captivity.
humans.
his splendor into the hands
He
of
sent
the
the
enemy.
ark of his might into
He gave
captivity.
his people over to the sword.
His splendor into the hands of
He
the
was
enemy.
furious with his inheritance.
He gave his people over to the
Fire
sword.
consumed their young men
He was furious
and their young women
with his
had
inheritance.
no wedding sons.
Fire consumed their young men.
Their priests
And their young
put to the
women
sword.
had no wedding sons.
And their widows could not weep.
Their priests were put
Then
to the
the Lord
sword.
awoke as from sleep.
And their widows
As
could
a
not weep.
warrior awakes from the stupor.
Then the Lord awoke as from
He
sleep.
beat back his enemy.
As a warrior awakes
He put
from the
them
stupor
to
of
everlasting
wine.
shame. Then he
He beat
rejected
back
the
his
tents of
enemies.
Joseph.
He put them
He
to
did not
everlasting
choose the
shame.
tribe of Ephraim.
Then he rejected the tents of
but he
Joseph.
chose the tribe of Judah
He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah. Mount Zion,
his sanctuary,
which
like the heights
he loved.
Like the earth,
he built his sanctuary, like the heights.
He chose David,
like the earth that he established forever.
Sheep pen.
He chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheep pen. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be shepherd of his people, Jacob,
with integrity
of Israel, his inheritance.
With skillful hand.
And David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hand, he led them.